The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the weathered porch of the Blackwell ranch house, as Darcy Blackwell pressed her palm against the cold window pane. She had been widowed exactly 3 days, 4 hours, and 26 minutes ago when a stray bullet had found her husband's heart during a bank robbery in Santa Rosa, New Mexico territory. The year was 1882, and the law was still something men wrote with their own hands and guns. Darcy brushed away a tear, her fingers leaving a streak on the dust-coated glass. At 23, she never imagined herself a widow, especially not after just 2 years of marriage. She turned from the window, her gaze settling on Richard's desk in the corner of their modest parlor. The polished oak surface was covered with ledgers, land deeds, and half-written letters, the business of a cattle ranch that now had no master. Outside, the hands were already talking. She'd heard them at the funeral, murmuring about how she'd likely sell up and move back east to her family in Boston. They didn't think a woman could run a ranch, especially not a woman who'd come west as a new bride with soft hands and fine dresses. Darcy crossed the room and lowered herself into Richard's chair. The leather creaked beneath her weight, still molded to her husband's larger frame. She ran her fingers across the blotter, touching the last words he'd ever written. Shipping costs for cattle drive to. The sentence remained unfinished, just like their life together. She picked up a pen, dipped it in ink, and began to write where he'd left off. She didn't know much about cattle drives or shipping costs, but she could learn. She had to learn. This ranch was all she had left of him. The grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, but Darcy barely heard it. She was lost in columns of numbers, trying to make sense of Richard's accounting system. Her eyes burned with fatigue and grief, yet still she worked. She would sit at her husband's desk until dawn if that's what it took. At some point, she must have dozed off because she startled awake at the sound of boots on the porch. Gray light filtered through the curtains, the first hint of dawn. Someone was approaching the house, and it was far too early for a social call. Darcy reached for the revolver Richard had insisted she learn to use. Holding it steady, she approached the door just as 3 firm knocks sounded against the wood. "Mrs. Blackwell, it's Preston Elliott. I've come about the ranch." She recognized the name. Preston Elliott was the owner of the neighboring Double E Ranch, a man Richard had mentioned as both a competitor and grudging friend. They'd had disputes over water rights and grazing land, but Richard had always spoken of him with respect. Darcy tucked the gun into the pocket of her skirt and opened the door. Preston Elliott stood on her porch, his tall frame silhouetted against the dawning sky. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the New Mexico sky. His dark hair curled beneath his hat, and a few days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. "Mr. Elliott," she said, her voice remarkably steady, "what brings you here at this hour?" His eyes flickered to the desk behind her, noting the papers strewn across its surface and the guttering lamp that had burned through the night. "I heard about Richard," he said, removing his hat. "I was out on the North Range when it happened. Just got back yesterday." "I'm sorry for your loss, madam," Darcy nodded, accepting his condolence with as much dignity as she could muster. "Thank you, but that doesn't explain why you're at my door at dawn." Preston's lips quirked in what might have been admiration. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Blackwell. Word is you're planning to sell. I'm here to make an offer before the vultures start circling." Darcy stiffened. "I haven't decided to sell anything, Mr. Elliott. With all due respect, madam, running a ranch isn't like managing a household. It's hard, dangerous work." "I'm aware," she said, tilting her chin up. "Would you like some coffee, Mr. Elliott, since you've come all this way?" He looked momentarily thrown by her calm invitation but nodded. That would be welcome. She led him to the kitchen, feeling strangely composed despite her exhaustion. As she stoked the fire in the stove and set water to boil, Preston settled at the kitchen table, his large frame making the room seem smaller. "You were up all night," he observed. "I was reviewing the books," Darcy replied, measuring coffee grounds into the pot. "Find anything interesting?" She turned to look at him, studying his face for signs of ulterior motives. "I found that my husband was a meticulous record keeper. The ranch is in good financial condition, despite what people might think." "People don't think the ranch is failing, Mrs. Blackwell," Preston said quietly. "They think you can't run it alone, and you agree with them." "I didn't say that." He leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. "But I've been running the Double E since I was 18. I know what it takes." Darcy poured the coffee and set a cup before him. "Then perhaps you can offer advice rather than attempting to buy me out." Preston's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You want to keep the ranch?" "This is my home now, Mr. Elliott. I may not know everything about ranching, but I can learn." He took a sip of his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "It won't be easy. The men might not take orders from a woman." "Then I'll find men who will," she replied firmly. A slow smile spread across his face. "You're nothing like what I expected, Mrs. Blackwell." "Darcy," she said. "If we're to be neighbors, you might as well use my name." "Darcy," he repeated, and something in the way he said it made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. "Then you must call me Preston." They drank their coffee in companionable silence as the sun rose fully, casting golden light across the kitchen floor. Darcy was acutely aware of how disheveled she must look after a night at the desk, but Preston didn't seem to notice or care. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "If you're serious about keeping the ranch, you'll need help. Not just with the cattle, but with the business side too." "Are you offering?" she asked. "I might be," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "Though people will talk if I'm seen coming around too often." "Let them talk," Darcy said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I have more important things to worry about than gossip." Preston nodded approvingly. "I'll come back tomorrow then. We can go over those books together." He stepped onto the porch, then turned back. "You know, I watched you sitting at that desk all night from my camp on the ridge. There's something to be said for determination, Darcy Blackwell." "You were watching my house?" she asked, unsure whether to be alarmed or flattered. "Keeping an eye on a neighbor in mourning," he clarified. "These parts can be dangerous for a woman alone." Before she could respond, he added, "You'll write something new here soon. Something of your own making, not just finishing what Richard started." With that enigmatic statement, he put his heels to his horse and rode away, leaving Darcy to wonder what exactly she had gotten herself into. True to his word, Preston returned the next day, and the day after that. Each morning, he would arrive as the sun crested the eastern hills, bringing with him practical knowledge about cattle, water management, and the complex politics of ranching in the territory. They would spend hours at Richard's desk, which Darcy had begun to think of as her desk, going over ledgers, maps, and contracts. Despite the initial skepticism of the ranch hands, Darcy refused to back down. She rode out with them each day, learning the boundaries of her land, the habits of the cattle, the signs of trouble on the horizon. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned, and her confidence expanded. At night, she would return to the desk, recording the day's events and planning for tomorrow. A month into this new routine, Darcy was surprised to find herself actually enjoying the work. There was satisfaction in building something, in protecting what was hers. And if she occasionally caught herself watching Preston Elliott a bit too intently, well, that was just practical observation of an experienced rancher. The first real test of her resolve came when a group of rustlers hit the north pasture, making off with a dozen of her best breeding cattle. The foreman, Jenkins, had come pounding on her door in the middle of the night. "Rustlers, madam. They've cut the fence and driven off some of the herd." Darcy was already pulling on her boots. "Gather the men. We ride in 10 minutes." Jenkins hesitated. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Blackwell, but this ain't lady's business. It could get dangerous." "Those are my cattle, Jenkins," she said, checking the revolver she now kept by her bed. "And this is my ranch. I'll be ready in 5 minutes now." She was mounted and waiting when the men assembled, their faces a mixture of concern and grudging respect. Darcy had proven herself capable over the past weeks, but pursuing rustlers was different from daily ranch work. "We should send word to the Elliott place," one of the hands suggested. "Mr. Elliott would lend us some men." "There's no time," Darcy decided, "but leave a message at their line cabin as we pass. We can follow the trail ourselves." They rode hard through the night, following the clear tracks left by the stolen cattle. As dawn broke, they found themselves in a narrow canyon, the trail leading toward a ramshackle camp ahead. Darcy signaled for the men to halt. "We need a plan. We don't know how many there are." "5 men, 11 horses including yours," came a voice from behind them. They all turned to find Preston Elliott approaching with 3 of his own hands. "And they're not just rustlers. That's the Cardenas gang. They've been terrorizing ranches all along the territory line." "How do you know that?" Darcy asked, both relieved and irritated at his arrival. "Your man caught us at the line cabin. I know this country better than most, and I know the Cardenas brothers. They're dangerous men, Darcy." The way he said her name with concern but not condescension made her soften. "I appreciate the help, but these are my cattle." "And we'll get them back," Preston assured her. "But we'll do it smart." Together, they formulated a plan. Preston and his men would approach from the east, creating a diversion while Darcy and her hands would circle around to recover the cattle. It was a good plan, and it might have worked perfectly if one of the rustlers hadn't spotted them and opened fire. The next few minutes were chaos. Gunshots echoed through the canyon as Darcy and her men took cover behind rocks. She could see Preston and his men returning fire from their position, but they were pinned down. Darcy spotted a path that led up the canyon wall. If she could get to higher ground, she might be able to outflank the rustlers. Without hesitating, she slipped away from her men and began climbing, her heart pounding in her chest. From her new vantage point, she could see the entire camp. The rustlers were focused on the men below, not expecting an attack from above. Darcy took careful aim with her revolver and fired, hitting one of the rustlers in the shoulder. The man dropped his gun with a cry of pain, drawing the attention of his companions. In that moment of confusion, Preston and the others charged the camp. The remaining rustlers, realizing they were outmaneuvered, surrendered quickly. As Darcy made her way down to the camp, Preston was already securing the prisoners. He looked up at her approach, his expression a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "That was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've ever seen," he said. "It worked, didn't it?" she replied, holstering her gun. "It did," he admitted. "You're a surprising woman, Darcy Blackwell." They returned to the Blackwell ranch with the recovered cattle and the tied-up rustlers, who would be delivered to the sheriff in Santa Rosa. The men were talking animatedly about the encounter, and Darcy noticed that Jenkins now looked at her with undisguised respect. Preston stayed behind when his men departed, accepting Darcy's invitation for a meal. They sat on the porch afterward, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "You could have been killed today," Preston said quietly. "So could you," she pointed out. "It's the risk we take." He turned to look at her directly. "Why are you doing this, Darcy? Truly, you could sell the ranch, go back east, live comfortably." She considered the question, watching the last light fade from the sky. At first it was for Richard, to honor what he built. She paused. But now it's for me. I've found something here that I never knew I wanted: independence, purpose. You've earned the respect of your men, Preston observed. That's not easy. And what about your respect? She asked, surprising herself with her boldness. You had that from the moment I found you at your husband's desk at dawn, he admitted. Most women would have been planning their departure, not studying ledgers. The night air had grown cooler, and Darcy wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. I should probably thank you for your help these past weeks. No need for thanks between neighbors, Preston said. Besides, I've enjoyed our conversations. So had she, more than she cared to admit. There was something about Preston Elliott that both challenged and supported her. He treated her as an equal, which was rare enough in the territory. Will you come tomorrow? She asked. There's still the matter of the water rights to discuss. I'll be here, he promised, rising to his feet. But not at dawn. Even determined ranchers need their sleep, Darcy. She watched him ride away into the darkness, a strange feeling of anticipation already building for tomorrow's meeting. The summer passed in a blur of activity. Under Darcy's leadership, and with Preston's occasional guidance, the Blackwell Ranch not only survived but began to thrive. She implemented new breeding programs, negotiated better prices for her cattle, and even settled the long-standing water dispute with the Double E Ranch in a way that benefited both properties. What began as professional courtesy between Darcy and Preston gradually evolved into friendship, and then into something neither of them named but both could feel. Their daily meetings became the highlight of Darcy's routine, and she found herself paying extra attention to her appearance before he arrived, even though she told herself it was simply a matter of maintaining professional standards. The townspeople of Santa Rosa noticed the frequent visits between the two ranchers. Gossip began to spread whispers that Darcy Blackwell had gotten over her husband mighty quick, that Preston Elliott was just waiting to absorb her ranch into his own, that the two of them were conducting business of a different sort entirely. Darcy tried to ignore the talk, but it stung nevertheless. One afternoon in late August, she rode into town for supplies and overheard two women whispering behind their hands as she passed. Barely waited for poor Richard to be cold in his grave. Always thought she seemed too refined for ranch life, but apparently she's not above using her charms. Darcy held her head high and continued to the general store, but the words followed her like persistent flies. She was selecting fabric for new curtains when the storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Peterson, approached. Mrs. Blackwell, she said with false warmth, how lovely to see you in town. We don't often get the pleasure these days, what with you being so busy with ranch affairs. The emphasis she placed on the last words made their meaning clear. Yes, running a successful cattle operation does keep one occupied, Darcy replied evenly. And Mr. Elliott has been quite helpful, I understand, Mrs. Peterson continued, her smile not reaching her eyes. Such a good neighbor. Mr. Elliott has been professional and generous with his knowledge, Darcy said, her voice cooling, as any decent neighbor would be. Mrs. Peterson leaned in closer. My dear, you're still young. It's natural to seek companionship after loss. But a woman in your position must be so careful about appearances. Darcy set down the bolt of fabric. Mrs. Peterson, I appreciate your concern, but my business arrangements are exactly that business. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a ranch to run. She completed her purchases quickly and rode back to the ranch, her cheeks burning with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. She was still fuming when Preston arrived later that afternoon, and he noticed immediately that something was wrong. What happened? he asked as they sat at her desk reviewing cattle sale projections. Darcy hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I went to town today. People are talking about us." Preston's expression darkened. "What kind of talk?" "The kind that suggests I'm either trying to seduce you for your ranching expertise or you're trying to court me for my land," she said bluntly. He was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "People will always talk. It's the way of small towns. It doesn't bother you." "It bothers me that it upsets you," he said carefully. "But I learned long ago not to let others dictate my actions." Darcy studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders. "Perhaps we should be more circumspect, meet less frequently." "Is that what you want?" Preston asked, his blue eyes searching her face. "No," she admitted softly, "but I don't want to damage either of our reputations." Preston closed the ledger they had been reviewing. "Darcy, I need to be honest with you. My interest in helping you has never been purely neighborly." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I admire you, your determination, your intelligence, your courage, and yes, I find you beautiful." He stood and moved to the window as if needing distance. "But I also respect that you're still grieving Richard. I would never presume to rush you or take advantage." Darcy felt a rush of conflicting emotions: surprise, pleasure, guilt. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Preston assured her. "I just thought you should know the truth, since we're discussing what people are saying. At least that way you can decide for yourself if you want to continue our arrangement." She joined him at the window, watching the ranch hands bringing in the horses for the evening. "Richard and I had a good marriage," she said slowly, "but it was brief. I'm still sorting through my feelings about his death and what I want for my future." "I understand," Preston said, and she believed he did. "And I'll respect whatever boundaries you set." Darcy made a decision then. "I don't want to stop working with you. The ranch has benefited from your expertise, and frankly, I enjoy your company." "Then we continue as before," he said, relief evident in his voice, "and let people talk if they must." But things weren't quite the same after that. There was a new awareness between them, an undercurrent of possibility that hadn't been acknowledged before. Darcy found herself noticing things about Preston. She had previously ignored the way the corner of his mouth lifted when he was amused, but trying not to show it. The gentleness of his hands when he helped her mount her horse. The intensity in his eyes when she spoke about her plans for the ranch. Fall came to New Mexico territory, bringing cooler temperatures and preparations for winter. Darcy had proven herself capable of running the Blackwell ranch, and even her most skeptical hands now followed her orders without question. She had earned her place in the ranching community, though some still viewed her with suspicion or disapproval. One crisp October morning, Darcy was surprised when Preston didn't arrive at his usual time. By noon, she was concerned enough to send one of her men to the Double E to check on him. The hand returned with troubling news. "Mr. Elliott's been shot, madam. Ambushed on his way back from Santa Rosa yesterday evening." Darcy felt the blood drain from her face. "How bad?" "Bad enough. Doctor's with him now. His foreman said Mr. Elliott was asking for you, though." Without hesitation, Darcy saddled her horse and rode hard for the Double E ranch. Preston's house was larger than hers, built by his father 20 years earlier when the territory was even wilder than it was now. She dismounted at the front steps and hurried inside, where Preston's housekeeper met her with a worried expression. "He's upstairs, Mrs. Blackwell. The doctor just left. Said the bullet missed anything vital, but he lost a lot of blood." Darcy climbed the stairs, her heart pounding. Preston's bedroom door was ajar, and she knocked gently before pushing it open. He lay in a large 4-poster bed, his face pale against the pillows. His chest was bandaged, and a sheen of sweat covered his brow. His eyes were closed, but they opened at the sound of her entry. "Darcy," he said, his voice weaker than she had ever heard it. "You came." She moved to his bedside, fighting the urge to take his hand. "Of course I came. What happened?" "Ambush," he said grimly. "Two men on the road back from town. They took a shot, then fled when I returned fire." "Did you recognize them?" she asked, pulling a chair closer to the bed. Preston shook his head slightly, then winced at the movement. "No, wore bandanas over their faces. Could have been simple robbery, but you don't think it was," Darcy finished for him. "No. They didn't try to take my money or my horse. Just shot and ran." He looked at her intently. "Darcy, be careful. This might not be about me," she frowned. "You think I could be a target too? Why? We've made enemies. The Cardenas gang still has friends. And there are those who don't like the idea of a woman succeeding where men have failed." Darcy considered this. It was true that her success had rankled some of the old guard ranchers in the area. And her partnership with Preston, whatever its true nature, had disrupted the existing power structure in the local cattle business. "I can take care of myself," she said, though the thought of facing gunmen made her stomach clench. "I know you can," Preston said, a weak smile crossing his face. "But promise me you'll be vigilant. Don't ride alone. Keep that revolver close." "I promise," she said. "Now, what can I do for you? Do you need water? Food?" "Just stay," he said, his eyes already drooping with exhaustion. "For a little while." Darcy stayed not just a little while, but until dark, keeping watch as Preston drifted in and out of sleep. She spoke with his foreman, ensuring the ranch would run smoothly in Preston's absence, and she found herself thinking how easy it would be to combine their operations, to work together officially instead of just as neighbors. The thought startled her. Was she really considering a future that included Preston Elliott? And in what capacity? She pushed the questions aside, focusing instead on the immediate concern: Preston's recovery and the threat that might still be out there. When she finally rode back to her own ranch, she took Preston's warning to heart, bringing 2 armed hands with her as escorts. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. Darcy found herself thinking of Richard, wondering what he would think of the woman she had become in his absence. Would he approve of her running the ranch? Of her friendship with Preston? She suspected he would. Richard had always encouraged her independence, had seen strength in her that she hadn't recognized in herself. In many ways, Preston did the same. The next week was divided between managing her own ranch and checking on Preston's recovery. The doctor had insisted on complete bed rest, which Preston found maddening. He was a man of action, used to being in the saddle from dawn until dusk. Confined to his bedroom, he became restless and irritable. "I should be out there," he complained when Darcy visited. "Fall roundup is starting, and there's the matter of the new breeding stock arriving from Texas." "Your foreman has it well in hand," Darcy assured him, "and I've kept an eye on things as well." Preston looked at her with surprise. "You've been helping at my ranch, on top of running your own." Darcy shrugged, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "It seemed the least I could do after all your help these past months." His expression softened. "Thank you, that means a great deal to me." She busied herself straightening the items on his bedside table. "The sheriff came by yesterday. He thinks he might have a lead on who shot you." "Oh," Preston sat up straighter, wincing slightly at the movement. "A man named Decker. Apparently he blames you for his brother's death." "Lyle Decker," Preston said, recognition dawning. "His brother was one of the Cardenas gang we captured. He died in prison last month. The sheriff thinks Decker might come after you again," Darcy said, worry evident in her voice. "And possibly me as well, since I was part of the capture." Preston's jaw tightened. "This needs to end. Once I'm back on my feet, The sheriff is handling it, Darcy interrupted firmly. Your job is to heal. He reached out and caught her hand, his touch sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. Darcy, promise me you'll be careful, if anything happened to you because of our association. Nothing will happen, she assured him, though she couldn't know that for certain. I've doubled the guards at night and I don't ride out alone anymore. Preston didn't release her hand. When I was lying there after being shot before my men found me, I had a lot of time to think. About my life, about regrets, about things unsaid. Darcy felt her pulse quicken. What things? I thought about you, he said simply. About how I should have been more honest about my feelings sooner. She sat on the edge of the bed, still holding his hand. Preston. I know it's complicated, he continued. I know there's your mourning and the ranches and what people might say, but life out here is too uncertain to waste time dancing around the truth. He took a deep breath. I've fallen in love with you, Darcy Blackwell. I think maybe I started falling that first morning when I found you at your husband's desk, determined to make your own way. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unavoidable. Darcy felt a tangle of emotions: fear, excitement, guilt, and something else, something warm and insistent that had been growing for months. I don't expect you to respond right now, Preston added quickly. I just couldn't bear the thought of dying without you knowing. Darcy found her voice at last. You're not going to die, Preston Elliott. I won't allow it. A small smile curved his lips. Yes, madam. She squeezed his hand once before releasing it. Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger. As she rode home that evening, Darcy's mind was in turmoil. Preston loved her. The knowledge should have been shocking, but somehow it wasn't. Deep down, she had known his feelings were changing just as hers were. The question was, what would she do about it? Richard had been gone less than a year. Was it disrespectful to his memory to even consider another attachment so soon? Yet she couldn't deny the way her heart lifted when Preston entered a room, or how she found herself thinking of him at odd moments throughout the day. That night, she sat once more at what had been Richard's desk, but was now unmistakably hers. The ledgers were in her handwriting now, the business decisions bearing her stamp. She had made the ranch her own, had carved out a place for herself in this harsh, beautiful country. Could she make room in her life for love as well? The answer came to her slowly, as the moon rose over the distant mountains. Yes. Life was too precious, too uncertain to deny the chance for happiness. Richard would have wanted that for her, she was certain. But first, there was the matter of Lyle Decker and the threat he posed. Darcy had no intention of beginning a new chapter with that shadow hanging over them. The next morning, she rode to town with 4 of her most trusted hands. At the sheriff's office, she found the lawman preparing to lead a posse. Mrs. Blackwell, Sheriff Tanner greeted her. I was just about to send word to you and Mr. Elliott. We've got solid information that Decker and 2 companions are holed up in an abandoned mine about 15 miles north of here. I want to join the posse, Darcy said, her voice firm. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Madam, this is likely to be dangerous work. These men are killers. They threatened my ranch and shot my neighbor, Darcy replied. I have every right to be part of bringing them to justice. Several of the men in the office exchanged glances, but something in Darcy's expression must have convinced the sheriff. You can ride with us, he conceded. But you stay back when we approach the mine. That's non-negotiable. Darcy nodded her agreement, though privately she had no intention of remaining idle if the situation called for action. The posse rode out within the hour, a group of 12 determined men and 1 equally determined woman. The abandoned mine was in rough country, a series of hills dotted with scrubby pine and rock formations. As they approached, the sheriff signaled for silence, then divided the group to surround the mine entrance. Darcy was positioned with 2 deputies behind a large boulder, with strict instructions to stay put. From her vantage point, she could see the dark mouth of the mine and the remains of a recent campfire nearby. Sheriff Tanner and 4 men approached openly, calling for Decker to surrender. For a moment, there was silence. Then gunfire erupted from the mine entrance. One of the deputies fell, clutching his shoulder. The sheriff and his men dove for cover, returning fire. Darcy realized with growing alarm that there were shots coming not just from the mine but from the ridge above it. Decker's men had posted a lookout, and he now had the posse in a deadly crossfire. One of the deputies with her cursed. "That's Curtis up there. He's got us pinned down." Darcy assessed the situation quickly. From their position, they had a clear path to a trail that led up the back of the ridge. If someone could circle around, they might be able to neutralize the threat from above. "Cover me," she told the deputies. "I'm going to try to get behind the lookout, Mrs. Blackwell," the sheriff said. "The sheriff is pinned down, and we're about to lose this fight if someone doesn't act." She cut him off. "I'm smaller and quieter than either of you. I can make it up that trail without being seen." Before they could argue further, Darcy was moving, keeping low and using the boulders for cover. She reached the trail and began to climb, her heart pounding but her hands steady. Years of riding and ranch work had made her strong, and she moved up the rocky path with surprising speed. Near the top, she drew her revolver and proceeded more cautiously. She could hear the continuing gunfire below and knew she needed to hurry. Peering over a rock, she spotted the lookout, a man in a dirty duster with a rifle, so focused on the fight below that he didn't sense her approach. Darcy aimed her revolver. "Drop the rifle, Curtis," she commanded, her voice carrying over the sound of gunshots. The man whirled, bringing his rifle around, but Darcy was faster. She fired once, the bullet striking his arm. He dropped the rifle with a howl of pain, and she rushed forward to kick it away, keeping her revolver trained on him. "On your knees," she ordered. "Hands where I can see them." From below, she could hear the sheriff shouting to Decker, telling him that his advantage was gone and to surrender. After a tense standoff, Decker and his remaining man emerged from the mine with their hands raised. The sheriff looked up to see Darcy standing on the ridge, her prisoner kneeling before her, and shook his head in a mixture of disbelief and reluctant admiration. When they returned to Santa Rosa, the story of how Darcy Blackwell had outflanked Decker's lookout spread rapidly. By the time she rode back to her ranch, she was aware of a subtle shift in the way people regarded her, still with curiosity, but now with respect as well. Her first stop was the Double E to share the news with Preston. She found him out of bed for the first time since his injury, sitting in a chair by the window. He looked pale but stronger, and his face lit up when she entered. "I heard what happened," he said. "Word travels fast." "You could have been killed, Darcy." "So could the sheriff and his men if someone hadn't acted," she replied, taking the seat opposite him. "Besides, I promised you I'd be careful, and I was." Preston laughed softly. "Your definition of careful and mine might differ somewhat." His expression grew more serious. "Thank you for helping capture the man who shot me and for everything else these past months." Darcy took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said, about your feelings." "You don't need to respond to that right now," Preston said quickly. "I understand it's complicated, Preston," she interrupted gently. "Please let me finish." She moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hand in hers. "I've spent a lot of time at that desk, thinking about the past and the future, about Richard and about you." He was very still, watching her with cautious hope. "I loved my husband," Darcy continued. "I always will in a way, but he's gone, and I'm still here, still living." And over these months, I've found myself thinking of you more and more, looking forward to your visits, missing you when you're not there." "Darcy," Preston breathed, his fingers tightening around hers, "I think." "No, I know that I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. "It happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice until it was already done." The smile that spread across Preston's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer, and then his lips were on hers, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. When they finally broke apart, Darcy was breathless and flushed. "That was long overdue," Preston finished, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "People will talk even more now," she warned. "Let them," he said simply. "I care about your happiness, not their opinions." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, making plans, sharing hopes for the future. It was decided that Preston would stay at the Double E until fully recovered, but they would see each other daily. As for the future of their ranches, that was a conversation for another day. As winter descended on the territory, Preston regained his strength, and their relationship deepened. They were discreet but not secretive, and gradually the gossip in Santa Rosa shifted from scandal to speculation about when they might marry. On Christmas Eve, a light snow dusted the desert, an unusual occurrence that seemed magical to Darcy. Preston came for dinner, bringing gifts and a sprig of mistletoe that he hung with a mischievous smile in the doorway of her parlor. After a pleasant meal, they sat before the fireplace, watching the flames dance. Preston seemed uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with something in his pocket. "I have one more gift," he said finally, moving to kneel before her chair, an echo of her own position months earlier. "Preston." He produced a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a ring, a delicate band of gold with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Darcy Blackwell, these past months have been the most remarkable of my life. I never expected to find love again after losing Sarah, but you've shown me that the heart has an endless capacity for new beginnings." Tears filled Darcy's eyes as he continued. "I know it hasn't been a full year since Richard's passing, and if you need more time, I understand. But I want you to know that whenever you're ready, I'm asking you to be my wife, to join our lives and our ranches, to build something extraordinary together." Darcy touched his face gently. "I don't need more time, Preston. My heart knows what it wants." She held out her hand and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "I love you," she whispered as he rose to kiss her. "And I love you," he replied against her lips. "Always." They were married in the spring, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers, and the promise of new life was everywhere. The ceremony was held outdoors, between their two ranches, symbolizing the union of not just their lives but their lands as well. Santa Rosa turned out in force for the wedding. Even those who had gossiped most viciously found it hard to remain critical in the face of such obvious happiness. The bride wore a gown of cream silk, and the groom couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on the arm of her father, who had traveled from Boston for the occasion. The celebration lasted well into the night, with dancing and feasting under the stars. As the party continued, Preston took Darcy's hand and led her away from the crowd, toward the ridge that separated their properties. "Happy, Mrs. Elliott?" he asked as they looked out over the combined ranches, now one of the largest operations in the territory. "Very," Darcy said, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I think I'll always be Darcy Blackwell to the hands. They've just gotten used to taking orders from me." Preston laughed. "You can be whatever you want to be. That's one of the things I love about you. You make your own rules." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the lights from the celebration twinkling in the distance. "You remember that first morning?" Preston asked suddenly. "When I found you at Richard's desk, I remember," Darcy said. "I was terrified but trying not to show it." "You were magnificent," he corrected. "And I told you that you'd write something new there soon." "You did," she acknowledged. "It seemed cryptic at the time." "I meant that you would write your own story, create your own legacy," Preston explained. "But I had no idea that I would become part of that story." Darcy turned to face him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "The best part," she assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Later that night, in the privacy of their bedroom at the Blackwell Ranch, which would remain their primary residence, Preston watched as Darcy sat at her desk, making an entry in the ledger. "What are you writing at this hour?" he asked, amused. She smiled over her shoulder at him. "Just recording a significant business merger, and a personal one too." He crossed the room to stand behind her, reading over her shoulder. The page held more than just business notations. Darcy had written, "Today, I married Preston Elliott, uniting our ranches and our hearts. What began at this desk in grief has transformed into something I could never have imagined. Richard, if you can see us, I hope you understand that love doesn't diminish love, it only expands it. And Preston, my love, my partner, my future, the story we write together begins now." Preston's arms encircled her waist, and he pressed a kiss to the top of her head. A fitting entry for a new beginning. Darcy set down her pen and rose to face him. "Our beginning," she agreed, taking his hand and leading him to their bed. The years that followed were filled with both challenges and joys. The combined Elliott-Blackwell Ranch prospered under their joint management, introducing innovative breeding techniques and expanding into new markets. They developed a reputation for fair dealing with their workers, many of whom were Mexican or Native American, a progressive stance that sometimes put them at odds with other ranchers, but ultimately earned them respect throughout the territory. In the winter of their second year of marriage, Darcy gave birth to their first child, a son they named Richard Preston Elliott. 2 years later, a daughter followed Emma Darcy Elliott, with her mother's determination and her father's blue eyes. The desk remained Darcy's domain, though Preston would often join her there in the evenings, discussing business matters that gradually became inseparable from family concerns. They were true partners in every sense, each respecting the other's strengths and supporting their weaknesses. By the time New Mexico achieved statehood in 1912, Darcy and Preston had been married for 28 years. Their ranch had become one of the most successful in the state, and their children were grown with families of their own. On the 30th anniversary of the day Preston had first found Darcy at her husband's desk, he presented her with a gift, a new desk, crafted by the finest furniture maker in Santa Fe from wood he had personally selected. It was larger than the original, with space for 2 chairs side by side. "Because some stories are written together," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth surface. That night, as had become their custom on special occasions, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over land that had witnessed their entire journey together. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked. "Staying here, building this life instead of returning to Boston." Darcy looked at him, at the face she had loved for 3 decades, now lined with experience but still handsome, still capable of making her heart beat faster. "Never," she said truthfully. "This is where I found myself, where I found you." He took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "That morning when I saw you at the desk, something told me that you were extraordinary, that you would change everything." Darcy smiled, remembering the grief-stricken young widow she had been and the journey that had brought her here. "We changed everything together." As night fell over the desert, they remained on the porch, hands linked, sharing the comfortable silence of those who have built a lifetime of love one day at a time. From the grief at a husband's desk to the joy of a life fully lived, Darcy's story had indeed become something new, something richer, and more beautiful than she could ever have imagined in those dark days of early widowhood. And it had all begun with determination, with a choice to face the dawn rather than surrender to the night, with a woman who sat at her husband's desk until dawn, and a cowboy who saw in her the promise of a future waiting to be written.